The unexpected mission. Sergeant Tyrus Vin squinted into the horizon, the twin suns of Aruth Prime casting long shadows across the crystalline landscape. He had seen his fair share of strange worlds, but none as mesmerizing as this one. The towering spires of the Aroyan capital city glittered like diamonds, connected by arching skyways that seemed to defy gravity. 2 years ago, humanity had braced for war when the Aroyan collective first appeared in orbit above Earth. Yet, the invasion never came. Instead, the willowy, lavender-skinned aliens had extended a hand of friendship, fascinated by humanity's determination and spirit. Now, Tyrus found himself serving as part of the security detail at the Human Embassy, tasked with protecting diplomatic relations between Earth and this ancient alien race. The day was like any other, quiet, routine, until it wasn't. Tyrus noticed a sleek hover car gliding toward the embassy gates. He turned to Corporal Vickers, who nodded. "Looks like we've got a visitor, Sarge." As the hover car came to a stop, 3 Aroyan females stepped out. Clad in sheer, flowing robes that left little to the imagination, they moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly. Their almond-shaped eyes, their shimmering skin dusted with tiny, glittering scales, it was hard not to stare. The leader of the trio, an exquisite figure with mint-colored skin and molten gold eyes, stepped forward. "I am Ambassador Zilia Starfire," she announced in flawless English. "We seek an audience with Ambassador Robards." Tyrus felt his pulse quicken. He had heard of Ambassador Starfire, one of the most influential figures in Aroyan society. But seeing her in person, with her delicate features and knowing smile, was something else entirely. "This way, Ambassador," Tyrus replied, trying to keep his voice steady. He led the Aroyan delegation inside, their soft whispers in a foreign tongue trailing behind him. Inside the embassy, Ambassador Robards greeted the visitors with his usual enthusiasm. The meeting began as expected, diplomatic pleasantries, discussions of cultural exchanges, but then things took a surprising turn. "I have a marvelous idea," Ambassador Robards exclaimed, clapping his hands together. "Why don't we start a cultural exchange program? Perhaps Sergeant Vin here could visit your capital and learn more about your people." Tyrus froze. He hadn't expected to be volunteered for such a mission, especially not when Ambassador Starfire's golden eyes locked onto his with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. "I would be honored to host your gallant warrior," Zilia purred, her gaze never leaving Tyrus. And just like that, Tyrus found himself on an unexpected mission. As he escorted Zilia and her entourage back to their hover car, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The hover car door hissed shut behind him, and Zilia's voice broke the silence. "I look forward to learning more about your human culture," she said with a mischievous smile, "and perhaps exploring a few other delights." Tyrus swallowed hard, unsure of what lay ahead, but certain of one thing: his adventure had only just begun. The alien capital's hidden wonders. The hover car glided through the glittering streets of the Aroyan capital, weaving between towering crystalline structures. Tyrus marveled at the cityscape, his mind racing with thoughts of the mission ahead. He was a Marine, trained for battle, not diplomatic excursions, yet here he was, about to immerse himself in an alien world far beyond anything Earth had ever known. Zilia reclined beside him, her robe slipping just enough to reveal the smooth, lavender skin of her leg. Her golden eyes never left him, watching his every reaction with a quiet, predatory interest. "This city has stood for millennia," she said softly, her voice a melodic purr. "But it has never seen a human like you." Tyrus felt a flush of heat at her words. He wasn't sure what she meant by that, but something in her tone sent a shiver down his spine. As the hover car began its descent toward a sprawling tower, Zilia leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear. "You will find your stay here enlightening." The platform led to an opulent penthouse, shimmering with colors that seemed to shift as they moved. Transparent tubes crisscrossed the ceiling, filled with luminous alien fish that moved in hypnotic patterns. Tyrus couldn't help but stare, his senses overwhelmed by the strangeness of it all. "You like it?" Zilia asked, her lips curving into a knowing smile. "This is my home. And now, it is yours as well, for as long as you wish to stay." Tyrus cleared his throat, trying to refocus. "It's beautiful," he admitted, "but I'm here to learn about your people, not just to enjoy the view." Zilia's smile deepened. "Oh, you'll learn plenty, Sergeant Finn. I assure you, there is much more to our culture than meets the eye." She stepped closer, her hand resting on his chest, her fingers tracing the fabric of his uniform. "Tell me, Sergeant," she whispered, her voice a seductive purr. "Are you curious about Aroyan pleasures?" Tyrus swallowed, feeling the weight of her gaze. He was walking a fine line, one that could easily lead to danger if he wasn't careful. But as Zilia's fingers trailed lower, skimming across his abdomen, he realized that danger might be exactly what he was drawn to. I'm here to learn," he replied, his voice thick with tension. Zilia's eyes gleamed with amusement. "Oh, you will learn, human. You will learn." As the door to the suite closed behind them, Tyrus couldn't shake the feeling that he had just stepped into something far more intense than he had anticipated. And as Zilia led him deeper into her world, he knew there was no turning back now. Into the unknown. Tyrus stepped out onto the balcony of Zilia's penthouse, taking in the stunning view of the Aroyan capital below. The city seemed alive with color and motion, the crystalline structures reflecting the twin suns' light in a dazzling array of hues. It was hard to believe that only a few days ago, he had been standing on solid earth, a simple marine tasked with guard duty. Now he was an emissary in a world that felt more like a dream than reality. But the reality of his situation was sinking in fast. Zilia had made it clear. She was interested in more than just a diplomatic exchange. The way she looked at him, the subtle touches, the way her voice dipped into a sultry purr, it was all leading to something far more intimate than Tyrus had expected. A soft sound drew his attention, and he turned to see Zilia stepping out onto the balcony. The setting sun cast a warm glow over her lavender skin, highlighting the graceful curve of her form. She wore a gown that seemed to shimmer and shift with every movement, barely concealing the toned body beneath. "You seem lost in thought, Sergeant Finn," she said, her voice carrying a hint of amusement. "Are you finding our world overwhelming?" Tyrus shifted uncomfortably, trying to keep his gaze focused on the city and not on the mesmerizing woman beside him. "It's different," he admitted. "Not what I expected." Zilia moved closer, her fingers brushing lightly against his arm. "I'm sure there are many things you did not expect," she whispered, her golden eyes locking onto his. "And yet, here you are in my home, on my world." Tyrus felt a strange mix of anticipation and unease. He wasn't blind to what was happening, but he couldn't deny the allure of it either. He had been trained to resist temptation, to remain focused on the mission, but Zilia was proving to be a temptation unlike any he had ever faced. "I'm here to do a job," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "I'm here to learn about your people, your culture." Zilia smiled, a slow, sultry curve of her lips. "Oh, you will learn, Sergeant Finn. You will learn more than you ever thought possible." Her fingers trailed down his arm, sending a jolt of heat through him. Before Tyrus could respond, Zilia stepped back and gestured to the city below. "Look at it," she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "Aroth Prime is one of the oldest cities in the galaxy. My people have lived here for millennia, long before your kind took their first steps into space." Tyrus nodded, trying to focus on her words and not on the tension simmering between them. "It's incredible," he said honestly. "Your technology, your architecture, everything is so advanced." Zilia's smile softened. "And yet, for all our advancements, we are still drawn to the same things as your people. Passion, desire, connection." Her eyes met his again, and this time there was no mistaking the intent behind them. "Tell me, Sergeant," she purred, stepping closer once more. Are you not curious about what we could learn from each other, what we could experience together? Tyrus swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. He had faced combat, survived brutal battles, but nothing had prepared him for this. Xillia was unlike anyone he had ever met, alien, yet intoxicatingly familiar in the way she moved, the way she spoke. Tyrus began, but the words caught in his throat. Xillia's hand came to rest on his chest, her touch gentle yet electric. You are strong, Tyrus. Your people are strong. That is why we find you so intriguing. You have a fire inside you, a fire that we Aroyans admire. Her fingers curled against the fabric of his uniform, and Tyrus felt his resolve slipping. He had come here to learn, to serve his people, but right now, all he could think about was the way Xillia's touch sent a thrill through him. I'm here to do my job, he said again, though the words sounded hollow even to his own ears. Xillia smiled, a knowing glint in her eyes. Of course you are, my dear Sergeant, but who says that your job cannot also be pleasurable? With that, she leaned in, her lips brushing against his in the barest hint of a kiss. It was enough to set his blood on fire, enough to make him forget, just for a moment, that he was supposed to resist. His hand came up, almost instinctively, to cut the side of her face, and Xillia's smile deepened. I knew you would understand, she whispered against his lips. I knew you would see the potential in this exchange. And just like that, Tyrus found himself swept up in a whirlwind of desire, pulled into Xillia's world with a force he couldn't fight. As the stars began to twinkle in the twilight sky, Tyrus knew that this was only the beginning, a new chapter. The next morning, Tyrus awoke to the soft sound of wind rustling through the balcony curtains. His body ached in the best way possible, a reminder of the previous night's passionate encounter with Xillia. He lay still for a moment, letting the memories wash over him, before finally forcing himself to get up. He dressed quickly, trying to push aside the lingering thoughts of Xillia's touch. He had a mission to focus on, and he couldn't afford to let his personal feelings get in the way. But as he stepped out of the bedroom and into the living area, he found Xillia waiting for him. She was dressed in a simple robe, her long lavender hair falling in soft waves down her back. She looked up as he entered, her golden eyes bright with amusement. Good morning, Sergeant, she said, her voice light and teasing. I trust you slept well. Tyrus cleared his throat, feeling a flush of embarrassment. I did, he replied stiffly. Thank you. Xillia laughed softly. There's no need to be so formal, Tyrus. We are far beyond that now, don't you think? Tyrus didn't respond, unsure of what to say. The truth was, he didn't know how to navigate this new dynamic between them. He was still a soldier, still bound by duty, but something had shifted between them, and it wasn't something he could easily ignore. I have something to show you, Xillia said, breaking the silence. Something important. Tyrus raised an eyebrow, curious. What is it? Xillia smiled and gestured for him to follow. Together, they made their way to the far side of the penthouse, where a small circular platform was set into the floor. Xillia stepped onto it, and the platform began to descend, carrying them down into the lower levels of the building. As they descended, Tyrus felt a growing sense of anticipation. Whatever Xillia was about to show him, he had the feeling it was going to change everything. When the platform finally came to a stop, they stepped out into a large, dimly lit chamber. The air was cool and still, and the walls were lined with strange, glowing symbols that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. This, Xillia said quietly, is where our true power lies. This is what we have kept hidden from your people. Tyrus frowned, confused. What do you mean? Xillia turned to face him, her expression serious. The Aroyans are not just advanced in technology. We possess something far more powerful than that, something that even we do not fully understand. She reached out and touched one of the glowing symbols on the wall. As she did, the room seemed to come alive with energy, the air crackling with unseen power. This, she whispered, is the heart of a rough prime, and it is the key to everything. Tyrus stared at her, his mind racing with questions. Whatever Zilia was about to reveal, he knew it was going to change the course of his mission, and possibly his life forever. Secrets of Horoth Prime. Tyrus stood frozen, staring at the glowing symbols pulsating on the walls around him. The chamber felt alive, as if the very air crackled with energy. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and an uneasy sensation settled in the pit of his stomach. Whatever Zilia had brought him to see, it was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Zilia watched him carefully, her golden eyes gleaming in the dim light. "This is our heart, Tyrus, the source of everything the Arroyans are and ever will be." Tyrus frowned, trying to wrap his mind around what he was seeing. "What exactly is it?" he asked, his voice low. Zilia stepped closer, her gaze never leaving his. "This is ancient, far older than my people, older than even the stars in the sky. It is a remnant of a civilization long forgotten, a force we barely understand ourselves. But it grants us power, the kind of power your people have yet to dream of." Tyrus's mind raced. If what she was saying was true, the Arroyans were sitting on a weapon of unimaginable potential. His instincts screamed that this was dangerous, something that needed to be reported to his superiors. But at the same time, he felt an undeniable pull, like the chamber was reaching out to him, whispering promises of knowledge and strength. Zilia seemed to sense his inner conflict. "I brought you here because I believe you are different, Tyrus. You are not like the others. You have a strength inside you that we Arroyans admire." She paused, her eyes softening. "And because I trust you." Tyrus met her gaze, a million questions swirling in his mind. "Why show me this? Why now?" Zilia sighed, her expression turning somber. "Because things are changing, Sergeant. The peace between our people is fragile, and there are those who wish to see it broken. Forces are moving against us, both Arroyan and human. We are not alone in this galaxy, and there are powers that would see us destroyed." Tyrus felt a chill run down his spine. "You're talking about an enemy." Zilia nodded. "Yes, an enemy that we cannot face alone. That is why I brought you here. You need to understand what is at stake, what we are fighting for." Tyrus took a deep breath, his mind racing with the gravity of the situation. The Arroyans had always seemed so composed, so in control. But now, for the first time, he saw vulnerability in Zilia's eyes. "What do you want me to do?" he asked quietly. Zilia stepped forward, her hand reaching out to rest on his arm. "Help us, Tyrus. Help us fight this threat. You have the strength and the courage we need." Tyrus swallowed hard, his thoughts swirling in confusion and doubt. He had come to Horoth Prime as a Marine, a soldier sent to protect the embassy. But now, he was being asked to protect something far greater, an entire civilization, an ancient power, and perhaps even the future of humanity. Zilia's grip tightened on his arm. "I know this is a lot to ask, but I believe in you, Tyrus. We believe in you." Tyrus looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. This wasn't just a diplomatic mission anymore. It was something far more dangerous, far more important. "Okay," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'll help you." Zilia's eyes lit up with relief, and a small smile played on her lips. "Thank you, Tyrus. You have no idea how much this means to me, to all of us." Tyrus nodded, still trying to process everything. He glanced at the glowing symbols on the walls, wondering just how deep this rabbit hole went. What's the next step? Zilia's smile faded, replaced by a look of determination. "We prepare. There is much you need to learn, and there is little time." She turned and began walking toward the far end of the chamber, beckoning him to follow. Tyrus took one last look at the glowing symbols, feeling their strange energy hum through his body. Then, with a deep breath, he followed Zilia into the unknown, the gathering storm. Over the next few days, Tyrus immersed himself in the world of the Arroyans, learning more about their culture, their history, and the looming threat they faced. Zilia was right. Forces were moving against them, both within and beyond their borders. Tyrus quickly realized that the delicate peace between their species was hanging by a thread, and one wrong move could plunge them into a conflict that neither side was prepared for. Zelia, however, remained a steady presence by his side, guiding him through the complexities of Aroyan society. As they spent more time together, their connection deepened. What had begun as an undeniable physical attraction grew into something more, a partnership forged in the fires of shared purpose and mutual respect. But the threat was growing. Tyrus could feel it like a storm on the horizon, creeping ever closer. And as the days passed, it became clear that they were running out of time. One evening, Zelia came to him, her expression tense. "We need to move soon," she said quietly. "The enemy is closing in." Tyrus nodded, his jaw set. "What's the plan?" Zelia hesitated for a moment before speaking. "There is a gathering of leaders tomorrow, a secret meeting. They will discuss how to counter the threat. But not everyone at that meeting is on our side. You need to be there, Tyrus. We need someone we can trust." Tyrus felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it, the moment everything had been building toward. He had trained for battle, prepared for war, but nothing could have prepared him for the stakes of this mission. "I'll be there," he said firmly. "Whatever happens, I've got your back." Zelia's eyes softened, and she reached out to take his hand. "Thank you, Tyrus. I don't know what we'd do without you." As she leaned in to press a soft kiss to his lips, Tyrus felt a fierce protectiveness well up inside him. Whatever it took, he would stand by Zelia's side. He would fight for her, for the Aroyans, and for the fragile peace they had all worked so hard to maintain. The storm was coming, but Tyrus was ready. The final stand. The day of the meeting arrived, and tension hung in the air like a thick fog. Tyrus stood beside Zelia in the grand chamber where Aroyan leaders had gathered, his gaze scanning the room for any sign of trouble. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but his resolve was unshakable. As the meeting began, it quickly became clear that not everyone shared Zelia's vision for peace. There were factions within the Aroyan leadership who wanted to break ties with humanity, to go to war rather than face the threat together. Tyrus listened carefully, his senses on high alert. He knew that the enemy could be anyone in the room, someone hidden in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then it happened. A sudden explosion rocked the chamber, sending shards of crystal and stone flying through the air. Tyrus instinctively grabbed Zelia, pulling her to safety as chaos erupted around them. "They're here," someone shouted. "The enemy is here." Tyrus's heart pounded as he scanned the room, his eyes locking onto a group of figures moving swiftly through the smoke and debris. They weren't Aroyans. They weren't human. There was something else entirely. Tyrus drew his weapon, his mind focused on one thing, protecting Zelia. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his voice firm. Zelia nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but there was also a fierce determination there, a strength that mirrored his own. Together, they fought their way through the chaos, side by side. Tyrus's training kicked in, his every movement precise and lethal. He took down enemy after enemy, but they just kept coming. It was as if the storm they had feared had finally arrived, sweeping them all into a battle for survival. But Tyrus wasn't going to give up. Not now, not ever. As the dust began to settle, Tyrus stood over the fallen bodies of their enemies, his chest heaving with the effort of battle. He turned to Zelia, his hands still gripping his weapon tightly. "It's over," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. Zelia's eyes met his, and for a moment, they just stood there, catching their breath in the aftermath of the storm. "No," she whispered, stepping closer to him. "It's just beginning. A war on the horizon." The aftermath of the attack on the Aroyan leadership chamber left Tyrus standing amidst a battlefield he had never expected. The enemy, strange and unrecognizable, had come from the shadows, striking with deadly precision. The explosions, the chaos. It was the start of something far larger than a simple skirmish. This was war, and it was just the beginning. Tyrus could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him as he and Zelia, made their way through the shattered remains of the meeting room. The crystalline spires that once gleamed with elegance now lay in jagged ruins, and the leaders who had gathered to discuss peace were either dead or scattered. "We don't have much time," Zelia whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. "They will strike again, and harder. They want to destroy any chance of unity between our people." Tyrus clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. "Then we fight back. We can't let them win." Zelia nodded, her golden eyes fierce with determination. "We have to gather our forces, alert your people. This fight is bigger than just Aroth Prime now." Tyrus's mind raced as he considered their options. The enemy had revealed themselves, but they hadn't shown their full strength yet. Whoever they were, they had the advantage of surprise, and now more than ever, humanity and the Aroyans needed to stand together. "I need to contact Earth," Tyrus said, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "They need to know what's happening here. We need reinforcements." Zelia reached out, placing a hand on his arm. "I will go with you. We will stand together in this fight, Tyrus. Our people must see that this alliance is the only way forward." Tyrus met her gaze, and in that moment, he saw the depth of her resolve. She was more than just an ambassador. She was a leader, a fighter, and someone he knew he could trust. The connection between them had deepened beyond mere attraction. They were partners now, bound by the shared goal of survival and peace. "We need to move quickly," Tyrus said, turning to the wreckage around them. "Do you have any way to reach your military? We can't do this alone." Zelia nodded. "I'll get word to the High Command, but it may take time. The enemy has already infiltrated some of our communication networks. They knew exactly when and where to strike." Tyrus cursed under his breath. This was worse than he had imagined. The enemy had been planning this for a long time, waiting for the perfect moment to throw both the Aroyans and humanity into disarray. "We'll figure it out," Tyrus said, determination hardening his voice. "We have to." Together, they moved swiftly through the city, their path marked by the remnants of the attack. The once glimmering streets of Aroth Prime now felt like the calm before a storm, a fragile silence hanging in the air. But Tyrus knew that storm was coming, and it wouldn't wait for them to be ready. A call to arms. Back at the human embassy, the mood was tense. The news of the attack on the Aroyan leadership had already reached them, and the Marines stationed there were on high alert. Tyrus wasted no time, immediately contacting Earth and relaying everything that had happened. His superiors were stunned, but the urgency of the situation left no room for hesitation. Reinforcements were promised, but it would take time for them to arrive. Time they didn't have. Tyrus stood in the command room, watching as his message was sent across the stars. His heart pounded in his chest. Every second that passed without action felt like a lifetime. "We'll hold the line until they get here," Tyrus said to Zelia, who stood beside him, her expression unwavering. "But we're going to need more than just soldiers. We need to unite our people, yours and mine." Zelia nodded. "The Aroyan people are proud, but they will fight when their survival is at stake. We just have to make them see the truth, that this enemy doesn't care about our differences." The room fell silent for a moment, the gravity of their situation sinking in. Tyrus knew this was more than just a battle. It was a test of whether humanity and the Aroyans could put aside their differences and face a greater threat together. If they failed, it could mean the end for both their civilizations. As they prepared for what was to come, Tyrus's thoughts drifted to the strange power Zelia had shown him, the heart of Aroth Prime. It was an ancient energy, older than the Aroyans themselves, and Tyrus couldn't shake the feeling that it might hold the key to their survival. "I've been thinking about that chamber you showed me," Tyrus said, turning to Zelia. "The one with the glowing symbols. That power, can it help us?" Zelia's expression darkened slightly. "It's a dangerous force, Tyrus. We don't fully understand it, and using it comes with great risks." Tyrus frowned, but nodded. He had expected as much. Still, if the situation grew dire enough, They might not have a choice. We'll keep it as a last resort, Tyrus said. But if it comes to it, we might need to take that risk. Zelia met his gaze, her eyes full of unspoken emotions. She understood what he was saying, even if the thought of using such a force frightened her. Agreed. The first strike. As night fell over Oroth Prime, the tension in the air was palpable. Tyrus and his team had prepared as best they could, but no amount of preparation could shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. Zelia stood with Tyrus on the balcony of the embassy, the city spread out before them. The stars overhead seemed distant and cold, and the faint hum of the alien city felt unnaturally quiet. "We've done all we can," Tyrus said quietly. "Now we just have to wait." Zelia's eyes were fixed on the horizon, her expression unreadable. "I fear the waiting is the hardest part." Just as the words left her lips, a distant rumble echoed across the city, followed by the unmistakable sound of explosions. The enemy had made their move. Tyrus's heart leaped into his throat as alarms began blaring throughout the embassy. He and Zelia exchanged a brief glance, both knowing that the battle had begun. "Let's go," Tyrus said, his voice hard and resolute. They rushed down to the command center, where the Marines were already gearing up for combat. The screens lit up with reports of enemy forces moving in from multiple directions, their numbers far greater than anyone had anticipated. "They're trying to overwhelm us," Tyrus said, his mind racing as he assessed the situation. "We have to hold the line until reinforcements arrive." Zelia stood beside him, her eyes sharp and focused. "We will. I'll rally my people. They won't let our city fall without a fight." Tyrus nodded, his resolve hardening. This was it, the moment they had been preparing for. The enemy was here, and they were out for blood. But Tyrus wasn't about to let them take Oroth Prime without a fight.